I didn't start doing what I do now until I was 40. I was an advertising guy. I had an agency that was on the Inc. 500 called Pelton & Associates. I worked with Steve Jobs on the launch of the Lisa and the Macintosh. I worked for a number of corporate clients like Marvel and Disney. And a number of my mentors died. They were in their 50s. And I was in my 40s, and I used to take a month off every year and pick the most remote place on the world, and I would go there. And to me, that was sort of a mental reboot and a way to get out of the humdrum and stress of running a business. But in those 1 month vacations, I would find something that was very, very satisfying, and that was going into a place that was either remote or war-torn, sitting down with people, talking about their lives, what they were doing, what they wanted, their hopes or aspirations, and then coming back to Los Angeles, to the epitome of civilization, and seeing that contrast and trying to figure out how we can live in a world that has such extremes, but yet using a lot of the things that I picked up in these rebel camps in my business. So I would sit around a boardroom and I would tell people about how a small group with no money and a lot of aspirations would overcome large, dumber, more affluent opponents. And they would all like, "That's very nice, Robert." But that was actually the key to my business success. And at around, I want to say the early 90s, I decided to retire. And I had a publishing company. I sold the content to make Expedia. I went out and got a 2-book publishing deal with Random House. I then wrote a book called The World's Most Dangerous Places, which was a funny travel guide to war zones and survival. And ABC News did a long-running web special on my efforts as a SOJO, or solo journalist, going to the world's most dangerous places like Afghanistan, South Sudan, et cetera, et cetera. And what I tried to do was engage people, not directly by saying, "Look, the world sucks, rub your face in it," but to actually sneak people into those places intellectually. So I wrote a funny travel guide on war zones. I sold it in the travel section. I did my show on the Travel Channel, basically how I met with very violent rebel groups in Liberia and Colombia. I then expanded that because I thought, I worked for 60 Minutes, I worked for CNN, I worked for Nat Geo. I thought that was a very masturbatory, I can't even speak, concept that you would go to some place, you would witness, you'd take pictures, you'd come back and you tell everybody about it. And while you chain smoked your galois and flipped your scarf, people would think you're cool. But I decided in 2003, I had an 8-show, no-cut contract and a celebrity endorsement deal with Discovery. I went off to Iraq to meet my Special Forces friends before the war, and I ended up staying. I bought a red Bentley, and I went around and I mapped mass murders because people couldn't talk about it in Iraq for 10 to 15 years. And I put them on my GPS, and I faithfully wrote down what happened. And I found the third level. So I'd gone from crass marketing genius to war journalist to someone actually engaged in trying to fix things or help people. When the war broke out, I found out that people were using a lot of Western information to try to understand Iraq. I set up a ground network called Iraq's Logger of about 700 people with a former news executive. And we did very well. We sold subscriptions because everybody was hungry, trying to figure out how the Middle East worked, who was who and what was what. I then took that same idea to Afghanistan, and I had 1,200 locals working for me. And they were creating a narrative, a structure, an idea of what it was like from their perspective, their problems, their ideas coming from their country into the military, the media, the NGOs. Until the New York Times put me on the front page, calling me sort of a ninja assassin running a secret ground network of spies. And then I moved to Somalia, and I tracked every hostage and every ship in Somalia. There were over 450 people kidnapped in Somalia. So I set up a ground network there with about 75 people. And then currently I have a ground network in Liberia. I track smuggling networks, human traffic networks. I was just in Sirte, Libya, and in Libya meeting with the smugglers to understand the business dynamics and what's going on and who's who. So where we come into saving the world is, during all this, I used to get a phone call from a gentleman named Christopher Catrombone in Malta, who was a young man, 34, and he had this idea, because he'd been affected by the drownings in the Mediterranean of migrants trying to reach Europe, was we need to save those people. And he reached out to me. He'd read my books, and he thought if anybody could figure this out, I could do it and help him do it. And he had made a lot of money in the insurance industry. So he went out and bought a boat, got some very expensive military-grade drones, and started rescuing people. And then he ran out of money because he was paying for it. So then I got the other urgent call saying, okay, now it's all your fault. You have to come over here and fix all this. So I then have spent the last 18 months, in Malta, working on MOAS. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about MOAS later. But the Migrant Offshore Aid Station actually has 2 very large ships with very professional search and rescue people. We work with the Red Cross, and we saved about 30,000 people so far. Now, what I want to impart to you is all in one slide, so it's very easy to understand, but it's kind of cool because we all like to think that we can change things by sitting in a quiet room with a piece of paper and planning things out, but that's not how it works. To understand change, you have to understand all the bad things in the world. You have to physically go out there, smell them, slither in people's brains, listen to explosions, screaming people, and understand that change really comes from bad things. You know, 9/11 wasn't a planned event. You know, things like famine, hurricanes, they're not things that we mark on a map and have easy solutions for. And that change will then create opportunities for people who are smart, people who are innovative, creative, aggressive, who can come up with ideas that'll instantly be grasped, not by intellectuals so much, but by the people that want them. And we're all familiar with the Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs created in 1943, in which people under stress will naturally gravitate towards certain things. They'll go from bad things to good things. This is what you see in the world today. When you hear about 500,000 or 1 million migrants crossing from Africa to Europe, they're moving from a bad thing to a good thing. Now, that's both a good thing and a bad thing. In other words, that can be used as a positive thing or it can be used as a negative thing. So the bottom line is that there are 2 forces in the world. There is evil and there is good. So evil will create opportunities for good people. Now, that sounds very simplistic, but it's good to remember that the next time you see something that disturbs you, is that is a call for you to do something. Next slide. So these are some photographs I've taken over the last few months, but people will naturally gravitate towards better things. And if you create those better things, they will come to that. So these are people fleeing a town under attack by the White Army, and these are people on basically a homemade raft from Egypt trying to get to Europe. Next slide. Right now, the biggest single problem in the world is that people are being forced out of their homes. It's not hunger, it's not warfare, it's a combination of things. So right now, we're seeing all these bad things create 65 million, a tide of 65 million people that are either internally or externally displaced. Next slide. Now, I'm going to stand over here. So where do you start? Now, you don't need to go out and buy a boat and save people. You don't have to buy an airplane, or you don't have to be Schindler and sneak people on trains. You basically have to start thinking about what is the solution that you could bring to make things better. So it could happen in your backyard. You could work with migrants, for example. If that's the biggest problem, you work with migrants to integrate them. You could be someone that deliberately projects yourself as a solution provider for this problem. You can change how you think about mass migration. You can look at this country and say, this country used to be pretty much empty except for indigenous people until suddenly the world's troubles filled it up. So we can rethink how we project ourselves and how we think. But the bottom line is that we have to understand that these forces are happening. They're not going to stop. Next slide. So MOAS is just one example. So I hate to jump from the huge, big think idea to the small solution. But these are the 2 ships we have. One is a lease ship called the Responder. That's a brand new rescue vessel. And this is an old fishing boat called the Phoenix. Next slide. And essentially, Christopher and his wife started this in 2013. They paid for everything. They spent $8 million. They realized that they could go out and they could save people. Now, at that time, Europe was using the Mediterranean as a moat. They figured that this space of water called the Mediterranean would protect them from the hordes of people, trying to climb into Europe. It did not. People just got tougher and more resilient, and they packed in more fuel, and they drowned more. So right now we have 2 crews, search and rescue crews. We have medical teams from the Red Cross, and we now have 10 other vessels that imitate what MOAS did in 2013. Now this is something to think about. Before 2013, there was no private search and rescue and medical care facility in a place where over 3,000 people were drowning a year. Because of this one man's idea and his wife, and because they committed their funds from living the good life to actually fixing a problem, they have not only rescue shamed Europe, but they have also created imitators. So he has personally rescued just under 30,000 people. Now these are very brutal, ugly things to watch. Children drowning, people screaming in the water. But there is no more vicious way to die than to drown in the middle of the ocean. Next slide. This is I love this picture. This is the old beat up fishing boat he bought. And one of the keys to motivating people is to not talk about anything, is to do something. Physically do something, and people will look at what you're doing and they will ask you, hey, what are you doing? They will try to imitate you or they will try to help you. Now, by buying a boat, he showed that he was serious about rescuing people, but he did run out of money. And then when I came to help him, I made sure that the world's media got involved and that they got stories and interviews and so on and so forth. And I structured it in such a way that people were motivated to say, wow, who is this guy and what is he doing? And this then brought in the MSFs and the emergencies and the Red Cross to say, wow, this is a very sticky, viral thing. The idea of being on a boat and saving a human's life in real time. And the media was blown away because when they talk about the front lines, you are this far from people screaming, help me, and they literally have to put their cameras down and pull people out of the water. So it became a very engaging story. Next slide. This is a map. If you go on UNHCR, you can see that this is a big deal. If the UN decides that this is the biggest single catastrophe or calamity that we're faced with, it's a big deal. But 3,000 people drowning is equal to some war zones. Next slide. This is kind of what we do. This is the coast of Libya. This is where the smugglers bring people in. They force them on small boats that maybe last, 4 or 5 hours. They get out into this, what we call the dead zone. More people die in the desert, and more people die just as they leave the coast of Libya, so we work with the Libyan Coast Guard. I spent a lot of time in Libya understanding, meeting with human smugglers, human traffickers, trying to understand how they work, and trying to separate the idea of encouraging these people versus being a rescue sort of ambulance. And one of the problems now is a lot of the NGOs see themselves as part of that chain. In other words, they feel that if they're advertising their location 4 hours off the coast of Libya, that then encourages migrants to risk their lives on a boat. It's a very ugly, junction between good intentions and bad intentions. And our goal has always been, whether it's Myanmar and the Rohingya, whether it's the Syrian camps, is to go into Turkey, into Rohingya camps, fully understand what the mechanisms are for forcing these people, and also it's voluntary, and try to mitigate that at the same time. So we created a site called migrantreport.org that digs deeply into the criminal activities and also the underbelly of human trafficking. So I would advise that any good idea also come with a very pragmatic view of the damage that a good idea can cause. Next slide. And these are real people. I mean, these are some of my pictures, but I can't tell you how many dead babies I've seen, how many screaming mothers, how many desperate people locked in prisons in Libya. It is an ugly, ugly business, but these people knowingly go into this flow of human traffickers because they want a better life in Europe. And we're globalized now, so these people know exactly what they're about to get into. Whether they're on their cell phones in Niger, whether they're waiting for their relatives in Amsterdam. Everybody knows this is what awaits the people that enter this chain. Next one. And the people that are involved in rescuing these people don't like what they see. They don't like seeing 180 screaming people packed onto a sinking rubber boat. but they know that this is the reality of the world. And if they're there to save them, at least those people are alive long enough either to be integrated into Europe or sent back through whatever legal process. We have no interface with what happens to these people once they're landed by the Italian authorities. We work directly for the Rome Rescue Center, so they decide whether we pick people up and what we do with them. But the fact that this is one family's idea and that it's funded by public donations and also by the Red Cross is a big plus. It's a big example of how a simple idea, don't let these people drown, in the face of a lot of negative adversity, can change the world. Next slide. So I'm not going to lecture, but if you want to do good, as I said, get out there and see what can be done. Try to do something that's measurable, that has units, that has things that people can look at. Do not be afraid to engage the media. The media is always looking for stories of good ideas being applied in nasty places. Grassroots, a lot of people abandon, they think social media where it's at. No, it's not. Grassroots is where it's at, face to face, just like I'm talking to you and you can talk to me. This is where opinions are formed. This is where ideas are shared. Just tweeting baby selfies or whatever, that's fine, but that's not engaging people. And also, be ready to move on, because sometimes a Band-Aid is no longer needed, and you need to tear that Band-Aid off and move on to the next thing. And a lot of people will form a lifestyle choice around a certain topic or an idea, and okay, fine, but be prepared to apply your success story to something else. That's really the key here. And do it as long as you're able. If you're 100 years old, keep doing it. I mean, there's no entry, there's no you must be this high to be a do-gooder. Next slide. So this is a film I'm working on. It's about the Migrant Offshore Aid Station. And it's really about the challenges of doing good and facing a lot of criticism, but actually seeing what happens when you save somebody's lives. Now, I wanted to leave some time here for questions. We have about, 4 minutes, 3 minutes? Okay. So ask away.
Why a red fence?
Because Uday Hussein looted a bunch of cars from Kuwait, and he had a bunch of them in his basement, and it was $2 grand. And it was fast, it was good, and it was stuck out. So, yes, sir.
When's the movie going to come out?
You sound like the guy that's paying for it. Yes, give me about 6 months, it'll come out. It's called The Crossing. It's quite a good documentary. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So you have an idea that could change everything. What would you do to get it in the media and actually get it out there? One bit of advice would do something?
Well, I say do something. For example, I'm on the hunt for Joseph Kony, right? And to get the media's attention, I went, just for fun, I went on some crowdfunding platform and I'm saying, hey, crowdfund me to find Joseph Kony. Well, boom, I was in the media all around the world within about 2 weeks. It's not that difficult once you start to do something. When you talk about something, the media's not interested. Like if you think we should save global warming, that's great, but then why is that news? If you physically are going to get in the balloon and go sailing around the world to bring attention, yes, you'll get the media's attention. So do something. And like I say, do not be shy about sending out emails and phone calls and all that kind of stuff. Also, do not forget grassroots. I mean, physically meeting people. Now, there may not be the top writer for the New York Times in this audience, but somebody here will probably talk to someone who will talk to someone, and that'll generate interest. Any more questions? Oh, yes, sir. Say that again? Oh God, I got 1 minute. No, I mean, look, I mean, I work around death, right? So I'm not the guy to tell you happy backslapping stories, but I will tell you this, that when I was in the Aegean in the winter, at the peak of winter, the thing that blew me away was the number of affluent Syrian families that were dressed up like they were going shopping, in which their boat exploded at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they're watching their children drown, and they're screaming, and you think this can't be happening. This literally cannot be happening. And that's not a funny story, but that's a very real story. And to save those people and to be there for those people at 3 o'clock in the morning is really why you do what you do, right? It's not about bragging, it's not about me, it's just about doing something. So, anyways, I think I used my time up, unless there's any more questions. Thank you very much for coming.